Namaskar. Welcome to Himalayan Heritage Foundation. As you are aware, for more than a month now, we have been involved in sensitizing everyone about the various aspects of Jammu and Kashmir, particularly about Kashmir Shaivism from the inception of Sri Ram Jayanti. And incidentally, today is the Nirvan Divas of Swami Ramji Maharaj, one of the foremost acharyas of Kashmir Trika, Kashmir Shaivism or Trika philosophy. Then we carried on this momentum and we're able to talk on various issues in terms of strategic imperative, the northern frontier, national security, philosophical aspects, literature and culture, and of course the genocide, because January is a month which is a black chapter in the history of the post-independence India, and especially for the Kashmiri Pandit community. And now we see that this denial of genocide has led to its replication and duplication all over the country because it was not taken seriously. It was termed as law and order problem. Today we have one of the, we can say, I must say pioneers. I have been going through his Facebook posts, his writings, his articles, and incidentally his book, The Infidel Next Door, that created a sort of ripples because it was written from a very different perspective. That's how I knew him. Actually, though he's in the Facebook also as in my friend list, but to see his persona, a very different kind, a very man of scientific temper, and moreover, a man of vast exposure, a trained psychologist, a PhD in psychology, and beyond that, having an international exposure as a fellow of Ashoka University, then a part of the fellowship program of Harvard University. And then it was a pleasure to see how he was interpreting this genocide and human rights violation all across the globe and then comparing these studies, these case studies. Dr. Rajat Mitra, I welcome him with folded hands, sir. And today he is with us. We'd like to see how a psychologist, I must say a scientist, views this whole perspective, because till date it has been viewed as a political issue, a communal issue, a sociological issue, of course. And denial of genocide has been there. And I say that denial of genocide is basically leads to duplication of genocide and it leads to destabilization. Dr. Mitra has written, though a fictional account, that is basically Infidel Next Door. So जिसको हिंदी में भी जब translate किया गया because there is a huge viewership, काफिर मेरा पड़ोसी करके, that I have gone through in the net, but I have read the English version, of course. So his papers and then his articles, how he basically dissects the things as a psychologist, as a behavioral scientist. Dr. Mitra, I will go straight away to you and ask you, how do you see what is genocide, how actually it affects the psychology of a person when his locale is disrupted, his habitat is destroyed, his place consciousness is eroded, how it impacts the people, and especially you have seen the Kashmiri Pandit issue, problem, their genocide. How do you see it, sir?
Okay. Thank you, Maheshji, and it's an honor for me to talk about something for which it's very dear. I mean, I can say that I have lived this issue for the last 10 years, maybe 20 years. You know, it's been something which has been, you know, just like my breath. So you have asked several questions, and I think I'll begin with the fact that what is genocide? The word genocide was coined by Mr. Dr. Lemkin, that was in the 1950s. And it talked about the mass killing of people, but much more than that, the mass killing of a civilization, of a culture, because mass killings have happened throughout history. And when it was first introduced, the history of the very definition of genocide is full of controversies. Nobody wanted to accept that. So, like, for example, America did not want to accept this definition because they have their history of genocide of the Native Americans. Russia did not want to because Stalin was in power and gulags were everywhere. Europe did not want to accept this definition because they had their colonial rule, and Britain was still ruling over Kenya and was planning a genocide, as you know, I mean, during the Mau Mau, revolt. So the colonial powers at that time, or who had just gone over, the Security Council did not want to accept the term genocide. So the history of genocide has been such that we have always had to fight for it. It has never been easy to do that. And what I am, in a way, happy, or I would say it fills me with joy to see that we have started doing that in India. We are talking about it. Now, another thing about genocide is that when the genocide happens and when we start talking about the genocide, there is often a gap between the two. Like the last exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, which took place in 1990, it actually finished a genocidal process that had lasted for over 500 years. It's a 500-year-long genocide, right? Unlike other genocides, which have been short, which have been sudden, and which have exterminated people in the matter of weeks, millions of people, the Kashmiri Pandit genocide has been over there for almost 5 centuries, which almost came to a point of termination on 19th January. Because if Kashmiri Pandits had stayed behind on that day, they would have been finished. And this is something that many Kashmiri Muslims, many people whom I worked with in the prisons, they said कि वो भाग गए तो उन्होंने अपनी जान बचा ली. अगर वो रहते तो वो मतलब they would not have, because we would not have let go of a chance like that. So this is something I'm telling you from my experience in Tihar prisons, where I worked for years together as a psychologist. And they spoke to me because they knew that I'm not from the prisons, I'm not from the police, I'm a psychologist who talks to them. And very often prisoners talk about their inner feelings and life. So this is probably a genocide that the world is slowly waking up to. And I can see that in another 5 years, 10 years, the world will wake up to more of that. So there has been a gap of, say, 25, 30 years since that period. But I can also say that as a matter of hope, that it takes around 25 to 30 years to rise above that. Because when a genocide happens, the immediate thoughts of the people are for survival. So only when that issue of survival gets over, they begin to regroup themselves, write about it, talk about it, speak about it. And that is what is happening right now. And I believe that it will condense together and become a big movement in the coming years. It is not going to die down.
So you have beautifully explained what actually genocide is. What are the various, you can say, interpretations of it? So certainly, you said that genocides have a history of denial. Now, you raise a very important question that people you have interviewed or you have basically counseled. They said that they left, otherwise they would have perished or like that. And that's a very important question. Recently, I was talking to one of the very important persons who was on board with us. We interviewed him a few days back. He said that what happened on 19th January 1990 was not a thing that happened spontaneously. It tells about the collective psychology of the majority community in Kashmir, because on that day, he raised a very important question. Because on that day, not a single killing was done. On that day, mosques, or you can say various institutions which were under religious control, orchestrated a kind of fear psychosis comprehensively in phased, in a very time bound phase. People were in street in large numbers, and they created a kind of an atmosphere and aesthetics which led to a kind of an atmosphere which was giving them an impression that nothing was well. So it created a fear psychosis and, of course, desperation. So it was well managed. The messages were sent. So on that day, on that night, basically, of 19th January, the society which I called had turned paramilitary, or people say it was radicalization of Islam. I say that it was Islamization of radicalization that was being displaced on the roads. And how do you address this question that society was psychologically motivated, and it was in such a planned way that they executed it so finely, and they took the minority by surprise. They worked in pincer. What kind of psychology was behind it?
Okay. Uh, we, when we commit a crime, it can be seen in two ways. Crimes are of two kinds, either organized or disorganized, right? Now, any criminal psychologist can tell you that from visiting the crime scene or from seeing the environment, whether it was an organized crime or a disorganized crime, right? A disorganized crime is, where spontaneous acts and spontaneous violence, spontaneous things take place. There is an element of disorder all around. So you know that it arose there and then itself, right? Organized crime is a different crime. Organized crime is, when you see that there is a pattern, there is a structure, that it has been done methodically. So, for example, I'm giving you an analogy, here to see that, for example, when a policeman visits a crime scene, he sees, first of all, whether it was a disorganized crime or whether it was an organized crime. From if it is an if it is an organized crime, from that he makes out that there was a lot of thinking and planning, behind the whole situation that existed. And this crime, this collective behavior that you were talking about, everything was an organized behavior. It happened, there was a synchrony to it. There were people who, for example, the way they behaved, as if they had been planning for a long time, to do so. Now, for example, one of the men whom I talked about, he said that I wore my mother gave me my best clothes to go ahead and see the Kashmiri Pandits running away. So I think it was to understand that, this thing did not take place on a spur of the moment. It was something, the planning was going on, the thought process was going on for centuries, and that is what culminated on 19th January. So this is the difference between organized crime and disorganized crime, right? Genocides are by and large organized crimes. Genocides are not disorganized crime. If we take, for example, the Jewish Holocaust, why it is unique is because uh, for the first time in history, a structure was built by which a race could be eliminated, right? In a similar way, if you see the Kashmiri Pandit Genocide, right, it has taken place over 7 exoduses. People were thrown out of their homes. They were given ultimatum whether you convert or whether you leave, threats to the women. So a systematic planned program was done over a period of 500 years. And I would call it an organized crime that had lasted over centuries and that culminated in the final thing on 19th January. It's an organized crime. And I think that we have to see it from that framework to tell the world that how this sense of organization lasted centuries. And today we know that there are two things about, for example, genocides. There is a concept called transgenerational trauma, trauma that goes on from generation to generation, right? And epigenetic studies have proved that we carry trauma in our genes. We pass it on, right? So, for example, say a family which, Kashmiri Pandit family, which ran away, they never talk about the trauma in their family, but then the second generation knows that there are certain topics which are not talked about. It gets onto their genes, and epigenetic studies have shown that we carry trauma in our genes. In the same way, this culture of epigenetic transmission also takes place amongst perpetrators. So the perpetrators who threw the Kashmiri Pandits out, they also carried this from generation to generation. And one thing which I find very, a sense of naivety is that there is no awareness about it, because perhaps we have not looked into that. But we need to see that those who threw the Kashmiri Pandits out, they talked of it. That Kashmir, in the same way that we talk about our running away, they also talked about कि that हमने उनको भगा दिया है, we have thrown them out, we will make Kashmir Islamic. This was a script that existed in Kashmir, in the families, as a collective. that we have to throw out these people one day to make Kashmir totally Islamic. So both these existed, and it is time that if we have to put Kashmiri genocide on a world map, on a where everyone to understand, we have to look at the psychological hidden dynamics that has existed in order to explain it, convince the world about the processes that took place. Last year, I was along with Mr. Sushil Pandit. We were together at this Holocaust Museum, and some of the Indians over there, they said that why don't we here itself have an exhibition of the Kashmiri Pandit genocide, and also the Hindu genocide that has taken place over the last centuries. And I said yes, and I think this is the way we can put it before the world, by putting it, first of all, the uniqueness of it. There has been no genocide like this, the what you have gone through. And it is important that I mean, I consider myself half a Kashmiri Pandit. I'm in the Kashmiri Pandit family. So that we need to start putting this up in front of the society. And if you permit me, I'll give you a small example.
Sure,
Yeah?
sure.
I'm also a professor of psychology. I teach trauma. I teach I teach such topics. Some time ago, I was talking about trauma on a related topic, and one of the students in my class, she is Kashmiri Muslim. She immediately talked about, so this is what our community has gone through. This is what our community is going through. I listened to her because as a teacher and as a thing for me, in both students, all students are equal. But when I finished the class, I was thinking about it and I was speaking it with my wife. She told me that for years you have talked in which there has been Kashmiri Pandit students too, but nobody has picked up the trauma that they have gone through in the class with you. Why? And she's a Kashmiri Pandit herself. I said, perhaps this shows a very important side or aspect of ourselves. We have to talk about the trauma at every level. A Kashmiri Pandit student, when such topics come up in whatever forum, in whatever things, we have to start talking about it. We have to start discussing it. Like the way, for example, other people who have gone through genocides, everyone from children to adults to everyone else, they talk about it. It is not left to just a few people, scholars or say academicians to talk about this. Everyone talks about it in every forum. And perhaps this is, I believe that we must do that. We must teach, first of all, our children, our grandchildren to start talking about it, to bring that awareness in themselves, right? Because that is how it will go ahead and spread and let it be known through the to the world. In the last article I wrote, and if you briefly permit me, I will say that
Yes, sure, sure.
I wrote about it, saying that I met this Kashmiri Pandit young man who once came and shared with me that he was in a conference on human rights, and a Kashmiri Muslim, came to him and asked him, first of all, he greeted him in Kashmiri to say that, we are both brothers and all that. And then said, when were you born? So he said, it's a conference. I'm speaking here. How does my age matter here?
Hmm.
And anyway, he was puzzled. He gave his age. He came back. When he talked to his father said that he asked your age because he wanted to know, and he was part of that whether you were a witness to the 89 thing or not. 1990, what happened between 86 and 90. Because if you were, and you were planning to talk about it, then he would immediately be ready to counter you,
Yes.
right? So he said, he was talking to me, he said, I felt angry with myself that I could not grasp it. That they were, he had planned, they had planned, but I was so naive that I did not even catch it. I said, now you have. So it becomes your duty to go ahead and talk about it. That the people who threw you out, your parents, your family, your community, they just did not it on the spur of the moment. And after that, they are making every efforts to hide it. So it's the task of the whole community to go ahead and speak about it. The young children, the students, that's what I feel is very important.
So, very correct, Dr. Saab. You raised very important question, that is transgenerational trauma and transgenerational streak to carry out genocides has been the history of Kashmir, and unfortunately, it's a continuity.
Yeah,
It was happening pre-independence and it's happening post-independence. What is most shameful is that it happened in post-independence democratic India. And
sure.
number two is that you rightly said that those who perpetrated genocide, it's the perpetrator playing as victim. That is a very different kind of a game. And
Sure.
it's greater extent that the victims are never selves, and when they catch their nerves, it's already too late. What has happened, as you rightly gave an example of student or a scholar in a conference presenting paper, they have the plan A and plan B ready to
Yeah,
counter it. And
exactly.
unfortunately, this thing has not crystallized down, percolated down into the persecuted community of Kashmiri Pandits, how to exactly present their cases, because they are in a perpetual genocide. And oral histories make a difference these days. It's a new trend. Of course, it's the most authentic
Sure.
kind of a thing. You might have visited various, we can say, refugee camps or their
Mm.
centers of rehabilitation. You might have interviewed people. You
Yeah,
might have seen the kind of, you can say, this kind of streak, how dormant this is. They have not been able to vent it out. As psychologists usually try to find out what is basically simmering inside. And
yeah,
basically, the problem is that if you ask a lay Kashmiri Pandit, a common, he has not the articulation to articulate it rightly
yeah,
what it actually happened. He was
exactly.
taken by a surprise. But
Yeah,
a scholar, a student, or a professor, or an intellectual may be articulate enough to tell what happened. But
exactly.
a common Kashmiri doesn't know, a common Kashmiri Pandit does not know, who's from lower middle class or from some village or from very normal family. He doesn't have that wherewithal. But the right thing you suggested, that truth telling, what
Yeah,
happened to you, just put it and let the experts do the analysis. What have been your
sure.
experiences while interviewing such victims in refugee camps? What was your
Okay,
analysis?
sure. There is, first of all, I would like to say there is a method called testimonial therapy, which is now accepted worldwide as evidence-based, and it is seen as a right of the victims to speak about their trauma and what they have gone through. So testimonial therapy right now it is a universally accepted true method for victims to speak about, and I would really like that we use this method to speak about the Kashmiri, our Kashmiri Pandit, people who have gone through this. Now you asked me what about my experiences in the camps. Now, let me say this that I have worked in many refugee camps across the world, and I have worked in Kashmiri Pandit camps also. And the work in Kashmiri Pandit camps actually was transformative for me. It changed my life. That's one I would like to say. I mean, it is something that I showed what is called a lot of countertransference. I would come back. I would think of it in my sleep. I would, sit back and write notes about it. The reason for it that was twofold. One was that they were sharing so much about themselves, which they had not been able to do so. Uh, Almost no psychologist or psychiatrist had gone and worked with them in terms of finding out their histories, particularly the history of abuse and atrocities. The studies that were done were mostly about depression, anxiety, and several such topics. But sitting with them and you know talking with them, like for example, the way you would do with refugee camps, otherwise, in many other places, nobody had picked this up for Kashmiri Pandits. Like, for example, one of my friends, she is working with Syrian refugees somewhere. she spends time, and we are both from Harvard University, so she talks to me about, we share experiences. She talks about holding groups with the women, finding out their experiences, what they have gone through. So I was also talking to her about the Kashmiri Pandit groups that I had held, and she was surprised. She says, the Syrian groups, the whole world knows, but Kashmiri Pandit groups, nobody knows. I mean, I didn't even know that you had, such a situation. I only know of Kashmir as a place where Indian army, commits atrocities against Muslims. So she says, it's kind of unbelievable. And I have even spoken about it in my Harvard group, and I uh, one day gave a full presentation about that. And it was a group of almost 400 people. They were all shocked. They had not heard about this at all, right? So somewhere our scholars and people, they have not taken that experience, to that level where it should. And I strongly believe that we should do that. Now, coming back to the experiences, I will perhaps talk of, one or two major experiences that I have had. Uh, my wife is also a clinical psychologist. She is also a Kashmiri Pandit, and we both worked together. She worked with the women and the children. I worked with the men and the boys, right? So we had different kinds of experiences. Like once the boys took me to see the gym that they had built, right? So I said, great. And then they said कि सर हमने कभी जो है सोचा नहीं था कि हम भी जो है अपनी बॉडी बनाएंगे, लेकिन अब जो है बॉडी बना के जो है वो बंदूक हाथ में उठाना है, right? Now I said, okay, you have to be strong inside, both physically and mentally. Do that, right? Then one person, he came and told me that, how to get the Kashmiri Pandit people assertive and physically, like wanting to defend themselves. He's finding it difficult. So I said, okay, this is because the community has been in primarily uh, roles, which are to do with administration. That's why the best administrations of India are Kashmiris, right? So there were small incidents like that, but there were other incidents. Like one day, my wife, she told me that the women's group, they are talking about the sexual assaults made on them. They haven't talked about it before, right? So she says, I'm feeling very disturbed about hearing this. Not because the incidents per se, we are both clinical psychologists, and I have interviewed hundreds of sexual assault victims on behalf of law enforcement and, along with law enforcement and judiciary. But what affected her and then later me, because she asked that if my husband can join, and they spoke about, is the sexual assaults and the silence that was there around that. First it was an old a woman in the 50s who started speaking, and then she looked at some of them and said, देखो जब हो गया है, इतने साल गुजर गए हैं, अब बता दो. So my wife, she said that this is what they are saying, that when they were coming in those in that period, so many of them were sexually assaulted, and they were told ki go to India and lodge a case. Here your cases will not be lodged. That is what affected me, that can this happen in India? Can this really happen in my country, that women go through such experiences and they are told that you go and lodge this in India? Is Kashmir not a part of India? And the thing is that it could happen with impunity, in the same way that Bitta Karate, he talked about killing so many people. He talked about impunity and walked around everywhere. So in the same way, the people who did that, they assaulted and they walked with impunity everywhere, and they, were, doing so. So incidents like that us really shook up, that all this thing has remained in silence for all these years, and this must come out, right? That's important. Now, the women will not come and make cases again. So many years have passed, they are silent about it. But in the same way that, uh, some of the cases of sexual assault, which were, I would, which I have reasons to believe are actually, not true and fabricated, they were, brought out to the attention of the whole world, things like Kunan Poshpara and others, right? The assault that took place on Kashmiri Pandit women never got its, the due or the attention that it should have, right? So an experience like that shook us up, and we decided that we are going to take it as our lifelong cause to keep on talking about it in every forum, that we can. Another thing that we realized in the camps was that the trauma was transgenerational, that it has been going on for centuries. Like a small incident, when we were coming out one day, a person who looked like a school teacher, he asked me aggressively, "Why do you come here?" So I said, "To work with the people, their trauma, Sadma case." Matlab, my wife translated Sadma in Kashmiri, and so he said, "आप हमारा सदमा समझते हैं?" मैंने कहा, देखिए, समझता नहीं हूँ. I don't understand, but I'm trying to understand, and trying to work with that, because psychological trauma can be worked through. So he said, maybe it will help you if I tell you that we call it Aurangzeb's dream, this camp. So I said, Aurangzeb's dream, where does Aurangzeb come in? And when I went back and I Googled and I searched, I found that Aurangzeb wanted to make Kashmir India's first region where there are no Hindus left. So he tried to exterminate, annihilate all Hindus from there, throw them out, kill them if they don't convert. And that was his dream. That dream was 300 years back. He could not finish it, right? Because people opposed, and, he fell apart. But it took 300 years to finish that dream. Now, why was that man saying that it was Aurangzeb's dream? Because this camp where they were all staying were the last of the people to run away from Kashmir. So Aurangzeb's dream is realized, right? Such a poetic, poignant, and evocative, thing. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes even when I talk about it today, right? It told me about a suffering of a people who have gone through centuries and centuries of persecution. And I believe that the world must know about it. And there are stories like that which should not be lost, which should be, told to the world. And the reason I choose the book Infidel Next Door to write about, because I realized that as a clinical psychologist, I have written hundreds of reports, testified in courts. But if I have to write about a whole community's trauma, I cannot do it in a single clinical report or even 100 clinical reports. I have to write a book. I have to write the story of a community as I've heard through them. And that is why I wrote fiction. And another reason was also to evoke the imagination of the world, through that process.
Sure. So you have given again, you talked about your book, Infidel Next Door. Now, it has got a response from the readers also, because it has been translated into Hindi also now, because it has reached cross section of people. And I must say that it's a very different kind of a book, because it's not written by a novelist. It's not written by some short story writer. It's written by somebody who is a behavioral scientist, who's a psychologist, who has dealt with the cases on ground, who has a I must say, cross country experience. How difficult was for you to pen it down? Because it's a kind of death immersion. It needs to write such stories and make them acceptable to the people. How it affected you, and what was your feeling? What kind of situation was it for you?
I think it's a very good, it's a very, very good question, and perhaps would, bring about, the characters I created, like, for example, the character of Anwar, who's a stone thrower, is actually based upon a lot on real life. There was a character like that whom I met. And in Tihar, in prisons, I had met this group of people who were called a Pattharbaz gang. Right now, in prisons, in Indian prisons, you have different types of groups. They are known by the speciality. right? Jaise, pocket mar gang, patharbaz gang, right? So when I heard the first time, I said, patharbaz gang, what is that? And then I realized that they are called so by other prisoners. They name each other. I mean, I don't name them. And they are expert stone throwers. So one day I went and, I was speaking to them. And what came out is their ideology. They believed that by throwing stones, just like, say in Palestine, they take that example. They believe that they can throw the Kashmiri Pandits out, they can throw the Indian army out, they can throw all of them out. And they have been fed this delusion into them, this false belief into them, that the stones picked up by you from the ground will take the power of 100 bullets and can destroy anything, right? And they showed me their skills, and I said, "Oh my God! I mean, I know about Kashmir, but I don't know about this side of them. I did not know that the role that this, the stone throwers did." So I said, I would like to, build a character around him. So that's why the character of Anwar came out, right? The way he thought, the way he felt, and it is a lot based upon what he told me, right? So I mean, the person like that, the character of Aditya, who was a protagonist, it came from interviewing the many Hindu priests, because one thing we often don't take into account, that the primary target of genocide in the Hindu genocide has been the temples. Destroy the temples and you will destroy Hinduism, because temples has been the very center, the soul of Hinduism in every way. And the priests, the many of them, they have, and they are still carrying this trauma within themselves, right? For example, we perhaps, if you talk to the Hindu priests of India, they will tell you, many of them, that one of their ancestors jumped in the well with the idol, in that, to protect the deity from being desecrated, because the deity is someone whom they cannot see being plundered. In many cases it was, but in also many cases it wasn't. So there is a story behind that of Hindu priests who have tried to save Hindu civilization, Hindu religion, Hindu culture. So the character of Aditya is based upon that. Someone who after 300 years goes back to resurrect his temple, because he believes that the temple is waiting for him, right? Now, if I take an analogy with Ram Janmabhoomi, right, we have gone back to Ram Janmabhoomi after 500 years. We have not given it up, right? So Aditya's story is the story of all Hindus, you know, who, I believe that we should go back in a way, emotionally, symbolically, to our destroyed temples and build them up again, right? It is because, not because as a religious issue, but also as a issue of our culture, our civilization. India is nothing without its temples, and the temples lie in a state of destruction, desecration today. Now, I often talk of an example that haunts me. Like, for example, in a city like Delhi, which has always been a majority Hindu city, the oldest, uh, the oldest and the biggest temple today is the Birla Temple, which was built in 1939, right? Now, if you take the oldest church, it is almost 250 years old, St. James Church in Kashmiri Gate, right? Now, uh, Hindus had money. They have built temples throughout history, right? Why it took them only so recently to build a magnificent temple, and that too by Birlas, and that too also which was inaugurated by Gandhi, no less a person than that, right? Gandhi inaugurated Birla Temple. He came to do that, right? The significance of the event is lost on us today, but we need to, I mean, I did some, research on that. And the other oldest temple which I found, I mean, there are small temples, but they don't have the magnitude or the grandeur of Birla Temple, is Yogbaya Temple. It's near Mehroli, which is a nondescript temple, and which, cannot be seen from far. And the reason for that is that diktat was used, which lay in effect for centuries, that the spire of a Hindu temple should not be seen, you know, beyond a certain distance. So nobody dared to. And it strikes me as extremely odd that, for example, in the south, if you see, there are so many big temples, right? We had Shilpa Shastra, which is devoted to building temples, which is thousands of years old. So why is it that that Shilpa Shastra was not used in Delhi? Fear, transgenerational trauma. Nobody built it because they know that it would get destroyed again, right? So we did not build that, and that culture of fear, that culture of transgenerational trauma, it lives through us. And I think that it is important, therefore, that we must visit that fear. We must erase that fear from within us to rise from centuries of alienation and trauma that we are still carrying inside ourselves. And that will only happen the more we talk about it, the more people read a book like Infidel Next Door or other books which talk about Hindu trauma. And there is a very good movement right now to write about Hindu trauma, to describe it. And it is not coming from established historians. It is coming from people who are outside history, who are bothered. Like I'm not a trained historian. I'm a psychologist, but I realize that our history is an essential part of our psychology and cannot be separated. And it's only when we do that will we become mentally healthy and mentally whole again, right? We were cut off from our roots. We remain cut off from our roots. And that is where we need to connect with ourselves.
Again, a very important thing you have raised, Dr. Saab, that we are seeing things in compartments because it's the job of historian to jot it down, to jot down the memories, accounts, and that's why we have not been able to fill the gaps. So it's an era of cross-disciplinary research, as you rightly said.
Sure.
And if this cross-disciplinary approach is taken into, you can say, consideration by the policymakers, we can have a
Sure.
sea change in modern India. Historians
Exactly.
there, anthropologists there, psychologists there, art historians, and because it's all about place consciousness, whether it's Kashmir
Sure.
or India, and Kashmir was the epicenter of Sanskrit civilization of India. Because I have a very different kind of view. Because I people say that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India. I say that Jammu and Kashmir is the nerve center of the Indic
Sure.
civilization. It
Yeah.
was assaulted in the Himalayas, and when you assault the nervous system, it leads to paralysis of the limbs and other parts of the body.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that's what has actually happened. And that's why we see that what happened in Kashmir, it was brushed under the carpet, it was denied, and this denial of genocide has led to duplication and replication of genocide in other parts where it was not expected. And
Yeah.
so likewise, you raised many fundamental questions which are very fundamental in the sense that truth telling is very important, and death immersion for that is very important. You have to understand, you not don't have to be a historian to understand these things. And
Sure.
one thing is very important: when you are with a clean mind, open mind, you write many things which are innovative and of course
Sure.
without any baggage, and that
Exactly.
gives a sense of fresh breeze into the discourse. And
Sure.
I see Infidel Next Door like that because I have read it many times for different purposes. I
Thank
tried to
you.
make out many things out of it. It was so out of box for me. Really wonderful. Now,
I
one
can,
more thing, one more
I,
thing is that
sure.
now you have visited camps, you have talked to both sides, the perpetrator and the persecuted, and
Yeah.
now you have devised a kind of a framework under which you can understand the psychologies. Then you are comparing it with the case studies of other countries. You have
Yeah.
been an alumni of an illustrious institution.
Yeah.
And now, how do you see? Is there some change in discourse in academia regarding the genocides in India, or you can say Hindu genocides in India? As you rightly said, you extended it to a broader, you can say, consciousness. You said that what happened in Delhi, we can't see temples of magnificent size visible because there was a kind of, you can say, a fear psychosis there. So, do you think that these persecuted communities, they develop a kind, as you said, there is a transgenerational
Trauma.
problem in genes. It leads to a kind of, you can say, sickness
Yeah.
of slavery and defeatist mentality in the
Sure.
victim. And this reflects in compromises. This
Uh-huh.
reflects in a kind of subversion and cultivation of fifth column. And these suppressed people who don't tell the truth. ultimately land up as fifth columnists and subversives and damage the discourse of the community. How do you see it that way?
Sometime a couple of years back, I was in a conference in USA, and a Native American got up and he said, "To me, the whole of America is a graveyard of my ancestors." Okay. Then he said, "The land on which we have this conference land is a stolen land, right? And this is the land which has been, taken away from my ancestors, and killing, right?" There was pin drop silence across the whole conference. Nobody could refute him what he was talking about, right? We have to go and do something similar along those lines. Like the whole of Kashmir, for example, to me is you know graveyard, a place where there are stories at every corner that are begging to be heard. And one of the places, for example, is Batmazar. you know. And how did I know about Batmazar? My father-in-law told me. And he told me that, as a school student in Srinagar, they would take a boat and they would go across the lake. And uh, the boatman would not stop at Batmazar if there were Hindus on the thing. So then one day he asked that ki aap log in Kashmiri, why don't you stop over here? And he said, I don't want to talk about it because they would stop on the way and make food over there. But he didn't talk. He came and asked his father, whose father told him that, right? Now I searched for Batmazar on the net. I found almost nothing. But I found it in the history of people. I found it that people have carried it within themselves, right? Like my father-in-law who shared this story with me. Then when I was writing about the temples that were destroyed in Kashmir, right? My father-in-law again, told me about several temples and how they used to be destroyed by keeping logs of wood inside, and the heat would generate over a period of few days, and they would come down, right? Now, these things are not documented historically, what we have gone through in our history. And this is what we need to start presenting, a history of 500 years of genocide, what has happened. What we very often show are some pictures, but I think we have to go beyond that and use psychological, anthropological, psychohistorian framework, psychohistory framework, sorry, like the way people have made efforts to point out the genocides in other places. And I believe that if we do that, a genocide far more traumatic than any other in history will come out as to how an entire civilization was planned in an organized way to be wiped out. And you asked me how it was for me to write. It changed me as a person. It has changed me as a person completely, this book. It has taken me 5 years to write. And what if this meeting allows, I can only say that what I realized is that how much Hindu trauma is denied, because most publishers, they refused it. And I mean, these are the people, some of them I knew very well. They had asked me to write books on psychology, on my work as a clinical psychologist, on my work in prisons, on many other areas. So when I went to them with this book, they said, "Ki, Dr. Saab, aapne ye kya likh diya? What have you written? We were expecting a really, non-fiction clinical treatise from you." So I said, this is probably more true to me than any non-fictional book that I will ever write, right? I plan to write one, and it is on its way to publication. So they refused it. And I realized why. Not because people read it. And but people, the publishers would not do so, because to write about Hindu trauma, about Kashmiri Pandits trauma, is a taboo topic, right? They asked me to make major changes. They said that you write about the Kashmiri Muslim trauma, we will publish it. just make changes, and we do that. So I said, why? I mean, why won't you write about Kashmiri Hindu trauma or Kashmiri Pandit trauma? And the answer was the same everywhere. I mean, it came in different ways, but it meant the same thing. No, this is a book which we cannot publish. This is a book that we don't want to talk about. And I realized why. The reason was very simple. It had to be denied. It had to be kept away from the, readership of the world. So therefore, it has been a solo battle to get this book published, to talk about it. To let it be known. And I'm glad to say that people who have read it, they have, who are not aware of this, they have been deeply affected by this. Professor Vamik Walken, who is he's a Nobel Prize nominee 5 times and one of the most respected psychiatrists in the world, he read it and he said that it's an unforgettable read. And this is something has told me about a side of India that I did not know, and it should be on the readership of every person who reads about trauma in the world, right? So that tells me that what I'm writing is not something off the mark. I'm not writing something which is wrong, but what, like probably many issues about truth that come out very slowly and grows in people's minds, this is also probably will grow that way. And that is the way I see it. It is making the people aware about trauma, people who have been sleeping for almost 1,000 years. And when I say sleeping, I mean, people who have, whose, whose minds, whose mindsets, whose self-esteem has taken such a battering that they have lost literally the power of imagination to see something which has happened to them. The British, for example, as you know, they destroyed novel reading in India. You could not write something about, which was pro-India and anti-British. And the British knew that novels are the most dangerous thing that can happen in terms of, they're being thrown out of power. Novels are dangerous because they excite, they evoke your imagination. Nonfiction does not. If I write that so and so many people died, it will not move you. But if you read a book, it will disturb you. And many people who have read the book have found it disturbing. It has disturbed them. And that is the goal of my book. Like what Kafka said, that a true book is something that destroys the ocean of ice within you. Right? We all carry an ocean of ice, as he said, and a true book is something that destroys that. And that's what I feel that, books about Kashmir, talks about Kashmir should do. We who have gone through slavery for 1,000 years, that frozen sea, that frozen ice must melt right now.
That's a very interesting observation, Dr. Saab. Now, totally different question. As you rightly said, truth telling is very important. And in genocide or in Holocaust or in religious cleansing, memory is the shield.
Yeah.
Memory is definitely the shield. And
Sure.
it's basically those people who emerge as victim collaborators in a genocide, as we had coded Jews in the
Yeah.
German Holocaust, Jewish Holocaust. And
Sure.
these coded Jews or victim collaborators are far more dangerous for the community that I try to raise this issue. They become the fifth columnists and
Yeah.
subversives who compromise. And that's why it's important to document the things, the oral histories and
Sure.
the testimonies. How do you say that when this type of studies are not taken by the community itself, encouraged by the community itself, so it leads to the creation of more victim collaborators who
Yeah.
damage the cause of the community and act as the mercenaries of the perpetrators of genocide. What is your observation on that?
Okay, that's a very good question. Uh, there are, collaborators who downplay the Kashmiri Pandit cause. It never happened. That all this is exaggeration. It is made up. I mean, I have been told it is ahistorical, and the fact is that the way many people have done it, they have done it in a very organized, systematic way, and many from the Kashmiri Pandit community have fallen prey to that. I have met them. I remember having gone to meet this very well-known film personality who's a Kashmiri Pandit. and I was speaking to him about my book, and he said, "Oh, Kashmiri Muslims have gone through so much." But I told him that, "But you are a Kashmiri Pandit. I mean, why are you talking about Kashmiri Muslims, right?" So he said, "But they have gone through. Even if we have gone through something, they have gone through far more than us." So I said, "Okay, but the fact is that have you even talked about what you have gone through, or highlighted it, or brought it out, right?" So he's a person who belongs to that category, who's a collaborator, who does it for both ideological and financial reasons. And there are many like that. There are many within the community who are not upholding the values, who are not upholding the truth of the community. But I feel that it really doesn't matter in the long run, because the voice of truth cannot be suppressed. And as I see that today, despite every attempt to suppress it, every attempt to push it down, it is coming out and it is finding its place. And I think that's where our hope lies, that we will be able to deal with these collaborators. It's a self-limiting thing. They will go away on their own. Jews had their, collaborators who collaborated with Nazis and who even collaborated against the nation. There are people who are against Israel, who do not believe that, what every crime that Jews commit, say Israeli army, commits, they are immediately, they bring it up, but they don't bring what the Palestinians, first of all, do to them. So they are there everywhere. And I don't think, that we need to give them too much importance. I think they are on their way out.
Rightly said. So you see that this kind of thing leads to self-flagellation and things like
Yeah.
that. And ultimately, it doesn't work out because
No,
the
it
truth is
doesn't.
there, oral testimonies are there, people are living with it. So now, what do you see? Basically, there have been seven exoduses, as you rightly said, for 4 or 5 centuries. It is a continued process. It has gone into the genes. Now, in the democratic setup, when we talked about the reversal of genocide, because denial of genocide is double genocide. So, to reverse the genocide, to guarantee non refoulement, how do you see that the policymakers, what factors they should rope in? So, there is first the acknowledgement of the genocide, then non refoulement, and also non trivialization. What kind, as an expert, as somebody who looks into the things scientifically, what measures should be adopted by the policymakers to devise a kind of a method to reverse this genocide, to guarantee a sort of non-refoulement, so that this psychological trauma is there. This is a sociological trauma also. This is cultural genocide. It has many facets. If we
Yeah.
talk on, we'll go on talking. What, in your expert opinion, should be the measures to reverse this genocide, start the process of reversal of this genocide?
Okay. The one thing is that the best defense against genocide does not come from any policy. There, it comes from the inner strength and the collective strength of the community, of the people. If if the Kashmiri Pandits, if we Hindus do not unite today, we are going to face a genocide, no matter what the policy is. Right? It is we who have to go ahead and unite collectively in an emotional way, uh, collecting our roots, understanding our roots, and by acknowledging what has happened, what is our shared history. Like what united the Jews was their shared history of persecution. What unites people is their shared history of what they have gone through. Like, why is America a nation today? Because everyone there has a history of running away from the past. America is a place where you start a new life, no matter what has happened with you. So there is a shared history, and that is how you create a collective. So I think when the time has come, and I think that we are going towards creating that shared collective amongst us, the Hindus, and we are doing it for our survival. We are not doing it to attack or destroy or annihilate someone. We are doing it to collect ourselves into a group for our own survival, right? So that is what I feel is the most important thing. I can share with you a story. Like I have a friend who's a Jewish psychologist, and some time back, she had asked me that which country do you think is the safest country for Jews in the world? So I said, Israel. She said, no, it's Germany. I said, what do you mean? I mean, you're not joking, are you? She said, no, because for the last 70 years, the Germans have looked inside, acknowledged what they have done, and they have gone to the very roots of what caused anti Semitism, and they are ashamed of it. They feel guilty of it, and that guilt is something that is taught in their schools. The children learn that, what Hitler did to them, what Hitler did to them as a society. They remind themselves every time that they will not do it again. And that is why Germany is a place which I would say, and many of us say, are the safest country because we have examined ourselves. They have examined themselves. So examining yourself, and I'm talking of it examination as a psychological thing, when a community examines itself, when it forces the world to examine what has happened, that is what leads to safety from genocide, nothing else, right? That's very important.
Right.
The
Rightly.
acknowledgement would lead to that. And I think that that would, there are policies against, genocide, today itself. And, Susan Newman, who wrote a very well-known book called Learning from the Germans, she said, she said that when she was, once she was in Washington in the Jewish Museum, in the Holocaust Museum, and just some blocks away, there was a discussion going on about what had taken place in Rwanda, another genocide. So she said, she said the irony was, not lost on me, that all this museum, all these policies about genocide in the world still could not prevent the genocide in Rwanda, right? And it has not even been, more than 50 years, right, that it has taken place. So, of course, policies are important. I'm not saying that they should not be, but policies are secondary. Along with that is the collective rise of the people to examine themselves and say that why it happened so that we teach it to all the children. Like every Kashmiri child should know about the genocide. Every Hindu child should know about the genocide that has taken place and how it could have been prevented, how it can be done. Until and unless we do that, we have no way to prevent a genocide of Hindus in India. And this is what I would, firmly advocate, that we must make a chapter on genocide, Hindu genocide, in the textbooks of our students, both school and college.
Very important question, that sensitization, self recognition, and a kind of introspection is very necessary to,
Official. Yeah.
yes, exactly, to understand it and to address it. This has to be from that level only. Then it can lead to some deliverables, some tangibles on ground. And when Kashmiri Pandits as a community, they have been uprooted, their social infrastructure, their houses or their habitats have been destroyed. So naturally, there is going to be a creation of new ecosystem, new environment, or new kind of a settlement which can guarantee non-refoulement with right to life and limb. And the community has to, as Dr. Saab has rightly said, to generate a kind of self-awareness about, keep on teaching about, talking about it, not hiding it. To talk about the genocide is every talk about the genocide, every word spoken about the experience of genocide is basically a step towards its mitigation and non-refoulement, as he rightly said. So, Dr. Saab, you spared this time out of your professional schedule for us. It was more to understand from you from a very different level, from the level of a psychologist, a kind of basically a scientist who has worked on ground, rather than from any theoretician who talks from his cozy drawing rooms. It was really enlightening,
Thank you.
tantalizing, and thought provoking, I must say, because
Thank
it
you.
will open new vistas, not amongst the academia, but the common people, to speak about the genocide, get their testimonies documented, so that more truths come out. Because every genocide story has a new kind of dimension which can be analyzed, and which can be worked upon. So, and last question, it's a very different, I must say, out of curiosity, what next to be expected from you? Are you writing something new on some new dimension?
Yeah, I'm writing actually what is basically an extension of that. My next book is on India's. It's a story of a family who, at the time of India's freedom struggle, who gave their life, towards that, and how the blood of the revolutionaries is what led to India's freedom, and how scared the British were at that time, which made them leave. Because as I've studied psychologically, the fear that the British felt and the British carried at that time, especially the period from 1927 to 1947, I am really struck by the fact that the British were a terrified group over here in India, and they never walked through their trauma of 1857, and the fear which was created by the revolutionaries in India, by the Subhash Chandra Bose, by the revolt in the docks in Bombay, that created the scare and that made them leave. But that is not a story that is told again to our children, right? So that is my next book. It is called Island Without a Shore. The island without a shore refers to Andamans. And I will probably share a short incident with you.
Sure.
I visited Andaman. I visited Andamans very recently, the prisons, and it was around 15th August. And probably I'll share a little known incident that every year on 15th August, a group of revolutionaries from Bengal whose parents, grandparents died over there, they visit the cellular jail and they celebrate the 15th August over there. They don't ever come to Delhi. They said that the Red Fort did not give us freedom. Andamans gave us freedom, right? So I was speaking to the leader of the group, and he, knowing that I'm a psychologist, he shared with me plenty of things about how his life was affected, what he went through that, and the trauma that they went through. And then he said that when his grandfather, he was being taken away to Andamans, he told his daughter that I'm going to an island which doesn't have a shore, so I may not be able to come back to you. So that struck with me, and I said how our revolutionaries created such symbols, such images to tell their children. Did anyone, does anyone know about it? No. Do you know anyone who went to the prisons ever knowing that they will not come back? How did they have to explain it to their children? They left everything for our country. And this is the way they explained. So the book is named Island Without a Shore, and I hope to finish it in the next few months, and it will be out soon. So I hope people will read it, and it's an extension of the work that I'm doing right now.
That's really wonderful. That Island Without a Shore will be a kind of very offbeat and an unorthodox kind of a book again,
Yes.
and it appears from your this introduction, a big brief synopsis you have given, and really it's right.
We have to turn unorthodox. We have to turn different. We have been orthodox for too long. We have been led to believe things which are not true. So Let's be unorthodox. Let's look at things differently. The time has come for that.
We have been worshipping false gods, and that's why we've led to the false conclusions. And
that's right.
Rightly, Andaman Nicobar is the insignia of the national freedom. There's no denying the fact, because myself, I consider that to be a temple of the independent India. Sure. It should be, because I have been a very fond of Savarkar. Veer Savarkar was incarcerated there. His elder brother Baba Rao, younger brother Ganesh Rao Savarkar, all the Savarkar brothers, they were imprisoned there, but no one among them knew that they were imprisoned there. The whole family, there are many people like Savarkar brothers who really are the national heroes.
Sure.
So, and the people like Aurobindo Ghosh, who gave the national consciousness to us, the thinkers like Tilak. So this is how we should start worshipping the right
Sure.
gods for the nation if we have to
Yeah.
uphold the resurgent Sanskrit India.
One
Dr. Saab,
small comment,
yes, sir. Yes,
like
yes, please.
since you mentioned Aurobindo, like one of the things that which I really like about Aurobindo is that what he said is that freedom will come one day, to India. There is no doubt about it. But when will India's consciousness rise? That is more important. And that is what he was bothered about, and that is what he asked Indians to meditate. And I feel that the time has come for that.
Exactly. He's one of the Uttarpara speeches, and then the old lamps, new lamps for the old. That
Yeah,
should be our cardinal documents to go
exactly.
ahead. And it
Exactly.
was fascinating. It was wonderful. It was blissful talking to you indeed.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful to you, sir.
Thank you.
So we're looking forward to your next book, The Island Without Shores. We're eagerly
Sure.
waiting for it.
Sure.
And we will look forward that we'll bring you again on this platform to talk about
Sure.
it once it's
Sure.
on. So nice of you.
Thank
Namaskar
you.
and my
Namaskar.
pranams.
Pranam.
Thank you, sir.